The first day of the semester was always a mix of nerves and excitement. For me, Tyler James, a 20-year-old sophomore studying criminal justice, this semester was supposed to be like any other. But everything changed the moment Professor Marcus King stepped into the lecture hall. He was striking, a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark skin that seemed to radiate confidence and a voice that commanded the room. His physique was imposing, yet his demeanor carried a calm authority that instantly captivated me. Marcus began his lecture with an easy confidence, his deep voice flowing through the room like a melody. I was mesmerized, not by the content of his speech, but by him. His sharp jawline, perfectly trimmed beard, and the subtle smirk that occasionally graced his lips had my attention locked. I wasn't alone. The entire class seemed enchanted by him, but my fascination felt different, personal, almost obsessive. Throughout the lecture, I tried to focus on his words, but my thoughts kept drifting. I imagined conversations with him, moments where he might smile just for me, and scenarios I knew were wildly inappropriate. I hated how my mind betrayed me, turning admiration into something more forbidden. When the lecture ended, I lingered, pretending to organize my notes as the rest of the students filed out. Marcus noticed and gave me a polite nod. "Something on your mind, Mr. James?" he asked, his voice softer now but just as commanding. I stumbled over my words. "Oh, I just had a question about the syllabus." It was a lie. I knew the syllabus backward and forward, but I wasn't ready to leave yet. He leaned back against his desk, folding his arms in a way that made his biceps strain against his shirt. "Go ahead," he said, his dark eyes locking onto mine. In that moment, the air between us felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. I quickly asked a generic question and left before I made a fool of myself. As I walked out, my heart was racing, and I knew I was in trouble. The weeks that followed were a blur of lectures, assignments, and stolen glances. Every time Marcus's gaze swept across the room and landed on me, my stomach tightened. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it, but his eyes seemed to linger just a little longer on me than anyone else. It was thrilling and terrifying all at once. I started staying after class more often, always finding an excuse to ask him something trivial. He was always patient, answering my questions with a calm professionalism. But there was something in his tone, a subtle warmth, that made me wonder if he felt it too. One afternoon, I caught him looking at me as I packed up my things. His expression was unreadable, but there was a softness in his eyes that made my breath catch. I wanted to say something, to break the tension that seemed to grow every day, but I didn't dare. Instead, I found myself replaying every interaction we had in my head, dissecting his words and searching for hidden meanings. Did he notice me the way I noticed him? Was this all in my head? The uncertainty was maddening. One day, as I approached his desk with yet another fabricated question, he gave me a small smile. "You've been staying late a lot, Tyler," he said casually. "You must really enjoy this class." His comment caught me off guard, and I felt my face heat up. "I just like to make sure I understand everything," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. His smile widened, just slightly, and he nodded. "I appreciate your dedication." The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine, and for the first time, I thought I saw something in his eyes, something that mirrored the longing I felt. That fateful day came on a rainy Friday afternoon. The lecture hall was nearly empty, the sound of rain tapping against the windows as the last few students packed up their belongings and left. I stayed behind, my heart pounding in my chest as I debated whether to speak up. I didn't have a question this time, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Marcus noticed me lingering and raised an eyebrow. "No questions today, Tyler?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. I hesitated, my hands gripping the straps of my backpack. "Actually, I do have something I wanted to ask," I said, my voice low. He leaned back against his desk, his arms crossed in a way that made him look even more imposing. "Go ahead." I swallowed hard, my palms sweating. Do you ever feel like there's something between two people that shouldn't be there, but it just is?" His expression shifted, the playful glint in his eyes replaced by something darker, more serious. He didn't answer right away, and the silence stretched between us until it was almost unbearable. "Tyler," he began, his tone measured, "that's a dangerous question." "I know," I whispered, taking a step closer, "but I can't stop thinking about you." His eyes searched mine, and for a moment I thought he might push me away. But then he reached out, his hand brushing against mine in a gesture so subtle it could have been accidental. "This can't happen," he said, his voice firm but wavering. And yet, when I leaned in, he didn't stop me. The kiss was hesitant at first, but it quickly deepened, a rush of emotion and desire that neither of us could contain. When we finally pulled away, he looked at me with a mix of regret and longing. "This is a mistake," he said, but the way his hand lingered on my arm told me he didn't mean it. After that first kiss, everything changed. Marcus avoided me during lectures, his eyes barely meeting mine as he paced the front of the room, teaching with his usual charisma. But when the lecture ended and the students trickled out one by one, he would glance in my direction, a silent question lingering in his gaze. Each time, I stayed behind, and each time, the tension grew thicker. A week later, I found myself in the hallway outside his office. I hadn't planned to be there, but something about the way he looked at me in class that day made me desperate to see him alone. I knocked softly, my heart pounding in my chest, and when he opened the door, his expression was unreadable. "Tyler," he said, his voice low, "what are you doing here?" I hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision I was about to make. "I needed to see you," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't stop thinking about what happened." He stepped aside, letting me into his office, and closed the door behind me. The small space felt suffocating, the air thick with unspoken words. Marcus leaned against his desk, his arms crossed as he studied me. "This is dangerous," he said finally, "for both of us." "I know," I replied, stepping closer, "but I don't care, do you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing against my arm. His touch was electric, sending a shiver down my spine. "Tyler," he murmured, his voice softer now. "You don't understand what you're asking for." "I know exactly what I'm asking for," I said, closing the distance between us. "I want you." The kiss that followed was anything but hesitant. It was a collision of desire and fear, of passion and restraint. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Just him and me, and the fire that burned between us. Our encounters became more frequent after that. They were always brief, always stolen, and always tinged with the fear of being caught. The risk only seemed to heighten the intensity of what we shared. It was thrilling, intoxicating, and utterly reckless. One afternoon, after class, Marcus pulled me aside as the last of the students left the lecture hall. "Come with me," he said quietly, his eyes darting to the door. I followed him down the hall to the second-floor bathroom, where he locked the door behind us. "Marcus, are you sure?" I began, but he silenced me with a kiss, his hands gripping my waist as he pressed me against the wall. My protests melted away as his lips moved against mine, his touch igniting a fire that consumed me completely. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "This has to stay between us," he said, his voice low and urgent. "No one can know." "They won't," I promised, though even as I said it, I knew how fragile our secret was. One slip, one wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All I cared about was him. The way he looked at me, the way he touched me, the way he made me feel alive in a way I never had before. Keeping our relationship a secret was harder than I expected. The stolen glances during class, the hushed whispers in empty hallways, the hurried encounters in locked rooms. It all added up, creating a web of lies and half-truths that grew more tangled with each passing day. I could tell Marcus was struggling with it too. He became more cautious, more guarded, and I could see the weight of the secret we shared, taking its toll on him. "Tyler," he said one evening after another stolen moment in the bathroom, "we can't keep doing this." "You don't mean that," I replied, my voice trembling. "You feel it too." "I know you do," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Of course I feel it," he admitted. "But this could ruin everything. My career, your education, everything." "Then why do you keep coming back?" I challenged, stepping closer. "If it's so dangerous, why can't you let me go?" His silence was answer enough. Whatever this was, it had a hold on him just as much as it did on me, and neither of us seemed capable of walking away. It started with a rumor, whispers in the hallways, quiet conversations that stopped when I walked by. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the looks I started getting from my classmates told me otherwise. Someone had seen us, or suspected something, and the secret we had fought so hard to protect was beginning to slip through our fingers. I confronted Marcus about it after class one day, my voice low and urgent. "Someone knows," I said. "I don't know how, but they do." He looked at me, his expression grim. "We need to be more careful," he said. "No more meeting on campus, it's too risky." "But what about us?" I asked, my heart sinking. "Are you saying this is over?" "No," he said, his voice firm. "But we can't let this get out. If it does..." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. The stakes were higher than ever, and the walls were closing in around us. The cracks in our secret life widened faster than I could have anticipated. It was as though every stolen glance, every whispered moment had left a breadcrumb trail leading someone to us. I began to notice more eyes on me in the hallways, hushed laughter that silenced as I approached. The tension was unbearable, but nothing could prepare me for the moment everything fell apart. It was a Tuesday afternoon, just after Marcus's lecture had ended. The classroom was empty except for the two of us. I lingered as I often did, waiting for the others to leave before walking to his desk. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with a nervous energy. "Tyler," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "We need to talk." I braced myself, my heart sinking. "What is it?" "I think someone saw us," he said, his jaw tightening. "I overheard two students talking about something they shouldn't know." My stomach churned. "How? We've been careful, haven't we?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Careful isn't enough, apparently. We need to stop. At least for now." Stop, I echoed, my voice rising. You can't be serious. We've come this far. He held up a hand, silencing me. Tyler, I don't want to lose my job, or worse, ruin your future. This isn't just about us anymore. The air between us felt heavy, suffocating. I wanted to argue, to convince him that we could keep going, but before I could speak, the sound of a camera shutter echoed through the room. Both of us froze, our heads snapping toward the door. A figure darted out of sight, their phone still in hand. My blood ran cold. Marcus, I whispered, panic rising in my chest. Did they go after them? He barked, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard. But by the time I reached the hallway, whoever it was had vanished. I returned to the classroom, my heart pounding. Marcus was already packing up his things, his face pale. This is bad, he muttered, mostly to himself. Really bad. What do we do? I asked, my voice trembling. We wait, he said, though his tone lacked conviction, and we hope that whoever it was keeps it to themselves. But deep down, we both knew better. The walls were closing in, and there was no way out. The morning after the photograph surfaced, I woke up to chaos. My phone was vibrating nonstop, each buzz another reminder that my life had spiraled out of control. I hesitated before checking my notifications, already dreading what I would see. The group chats were alive with activity, my name peppered throughout the messages like a scarlet letter. Did you see the photo? Oh my God, Tyler and Professor King. Can't believe this is real. Guess Tyler's getting more than just extra credit. The comments ranged from disbelief to mockery, and the crueler ones stung the most. My classmates, acquaintances, and even people I barely knew were dissecting my personal life like it was the newest campus scandal. And it was. The photograph wasn't just proof. It was fuel for a wildfire that I couldn't control. I barely had time to process the online storm before reality hit me. As I walked onto campus, I felt the weight of every stare, the whispers that grew louder as I passed. It wasn't paranoia. They were talking about me. My name was no longer just a name. It was an accusation, a rumor, a joke. I tried to keep my head down, walking quickly to my first class, but it was no use. The stares burned into me, their judgment unrelenting. By the time I reached the lecture hall, my hands were shaking. I hesitated at the door, unsure if I could face the room. When I finally pushed it open, the atmosphere was electric. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as heads turned toward me. The substitute professor stood awkwardly at the podium, clearly aware of the tension but unsure how to address it. I avoided eye contact, slipping into the back row and wishing I could disappear. The lecture began, but I couldn't focus. My mind was racing, replaying the events of the past few weeks, the stolen moments with Marcus, the risks we had taken. It all felt so distant now, as if it belonged to another life. I couldn't shake the image of the photograph from my mind, the way it exposed something so private, so vulnerable. When the class ended, I stayed in my seat, watching as the other students filed out. Some glanced at me, their expressions ranging from pity to smug satisfaction. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them they didn't understand, but I stayed silent. What was the point? As I left the lecture hall, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. My heart leapt, hoping it was Marcus, but the message was short and cruel. Better pack your bags, Tyler. You're done here. The day after I received Marcus's letter, the weight of the situation became unbearable. The words in his letter echoed in my mind as I walked through campus, trying to hold my head high despite the mounting whispers. Marcus was gone, and his absence was louder than anything else. I couldn't escape it. Not in the lecture halls, not in the library, and not in my own mind. Campus life hadn't returned to normal for me. I had become a living emblem of scandal. Groups of students would fall silent as I passed, their expressions a mix of pity and judgment. In the student lounge, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. "Do you think he's expelled?" one voice asks. "No, but they'll probably put something in his record," another replied. Can you imagine being him, though? So embarrassing. The words stung, but I didn't stop to defend myself. What could I say? They didn't understand what it was like to be in my position, to have loved someone so deeply and lost them in such a public and humiliating way. The worst part was how empty everything felt without Marcus. His lectures had been the highlight of my days, a space where I felt both challenged and inspired. Now, the classroom felt cold and lifeless, the substitute professor merely going through the motions. Every time I walked into the lecture hall, I half expected to see him standing at the front, his deep voice commanding the room. But he wasn't there, and he never would be again. I spent hours in my apartment staring at his letter, trying to make sense of everything. The way he had described what we shared. "You made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years," brought both comfort and pain. It validated the love I knew we had, but it also made his departure all the more devastating. Despite the pain, a small part of me clung to hope. I imagined him finding peace somewhere far from the judgmental stares of campus. I pictured him walking along a quiet beach, the waves washing away the pain of our separation. But those images were bittersweet because I wasn't there with him. The dean's disciplinary board loomed over me like a shadow. My meeting was scheduled for the following week, and I spent every moment leading up to it consumed by anxiety. Would they expel me? Ruin my academic future? And if they did, how would I explain it to my family? To my friends? One night, I broke down completely. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, the letter clutched tightly in my hands, and cried until there was nothing left. I cried for Marcus, for the love we'd lost, and for the person I had been before this all began. The days leading up to the disciplinary board hearing were torturous. The silence from Marcus was deafening, and the shame of being the center of campus gossip had left me isolated and vulnerable. Even my closest friends struggled to find the words to comfort me. They didn't understand what it meant to lose someone who had become my world, and their sympathy felt hollow. The day of the hearing, I woke up before dawn, the anxiety gnawing at me like a relentless predator. I spent hours pacing my small apartment, replaying every question they might ask and rehearsing every answer. No matter how prepared I tried to be, the thought of sitting in that sterile room, explaining the most intimate and painful details of my life to strangers, made my chest tighten with dread. When I finally arrived at the administrative building, it felt as though I were walking to my own execution. The receptionist directed me to a conference room where the panel of 5 faculty members was already seated. The room was cold, the fluorescent lighting casting harsh shadows on their faces. Dean Harris sat at the center, his expression unreadable. "Mr. James," the dean began, his voice steady but firm, "thank you for coming. We understand that this has been a difficult time for you, but today we are here to address the allegations against you." I nodded, my throat dry. Yes, sir. The questioning began almost immediately, each panel member taking turns dissecting every detail of my relationship with Marcus. They wanted to know how it started, how long it had lasted, and whether I had been coerced. Their tone wasn't accusatory, but it was clinical, as though they were examining a case study rather than a person. Did you understand that engaging in a relationship with a faculty member was a violation of university policy? One of them asked. Yes, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I knew it was against the rules. Then why did you continue? Another pressed, her eyes narrowing. Were you aware of the potential consequences? I hesitated, searching for the right words. I wasn't thinking about the consequences, I said finally. It wasn't about breaking the rules. It was about him, about how I felt. Their expressions remained impassive, but I could feel their judgment like a physical weight. They couldn't understand. How could they? To them, Marcus was just a professor, and I was just a student. They didn't see the way he had looked at me, the way he had made me feel seen and understood in a way no one else ever had. After what felt like an eternity, the questioning ended, and I was asked to leave the room while they deliberated. The minutes stretched into an hour as I sat in the hallway, my head in my hands. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Would I be expelled? Would this follow me for the rest of my life? When they finally called me back in, the dean's expression was somber but not unkind. Mr. James, he began, after careful consideration, we have decided not to pursue expulsion. However, you will receive a formal reprimand in your academic record, and we strongly recommend that you seek counseling to address the impact of this situation. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. The reprimand felt like a scar that would never fully heal, a permanent reminder of my mistakes. As I left the building, I couldn't help but wonder what Marcus would think if he knew. Would he be proud of me for facing the consequences? Or would he see it as another reason why we should never have been together? That night, I sat on my bed, staring at the letter he had written me. His words were etched into my mind. Don't let this define you. But how could I not? Everything about my life had been upended, and I wasn't sure I knew how to move forward. Graduation day marked the end of an era, but it also felt like an end to the life I had once known. The ceremony itself was a blur. Smiling faces, celebratory speeches, and the overwhelming pressure to appear happy. As my name was called, I crossed the stage, my head held high, accepting my diploma with a smile that felt more like armor than joy. The applause was polite, the dean's handshake firm, but it all felt hollow. As I sat back down with the rest of the graduates, my mind wandered to Marcus. I imagined him in the audience, watching me with pride, his deep voice whispering words of encouragement. But he wasn't there. He hadn't been there for months, and the space he once occupied in my life felt as vast and empty as the auditorium when the ceremony finally ended. The celebrations continued into the afternoon. My classmates gathered in clusters with their families, laughing, taking pictures, and basking in the glow of their accomplishments. I wandered through the crowd, a glass of sparkling cider in hand, offering polite congratulations to those who approached me. But my heart wasn't in it. I felt like a ghost, drifting aimlessly among the living. As the sun began to set, I found myself drawn to the lecture hall where it had all begun. The building was quiet now, the halls empty, but the memories were louder than ever. Every corner of the room was etched with moments I couldn't forget. Marcus's lectures, his glances that lingered just a little too long, the stolen moments that had changed everything. I walked to the front of the room and stood behind the desk where Marcus had once stood. My fingers traced the surface, remembering the countless times I had approached him with questions, my heart pounding in my chest. This place had been the backdrop of our story, and now it felt like a mausoleum filled with ghosts of what could have been. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out the letter Marcus had written me, along with the note he had scribbled during one of our stolen moments. "You're worth the risk," it said, the words now faded but still powerful. I held the pieces of paper in my hands, my chest tightening as tears blurred my vision. "I wish you could see me now," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I wish you could see that I made it." The silence was deafening, but I stayed there for what felt like hours, lost in the memories. Finally, I placed the letter and the note on the desk, a parting gift to the past I was finally ready to leave behind. It was time to move forward, even if it meant letting go of the only person who had ever truly seen me. As I walked out of the lecture hall, the evening air was cool against my skin. The campus bathed in the warm hues of the setting sun. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace, as though the weight I had been carrying was finally beginning to lift. Marcus was gone, but his impact on my life was something I would carry with me forever. I made my way to the edge of campus, where a small park overlooked the city. The view was breathtaking, the buildings glowing in the fading light, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, scrolling through my messages until I found the last one I had sent to Marcus. "Please call me. We can fix this." It had gone unanswered, but I couldn't bring myself to delete it. For a moment, I considered sending another message, a final goodbye to the man who had meant so much to me. But before I could, a notification popped up, a new email. The subject line made my heart stop. From Marcus. My hand shook as I opened it, my breath catching in my throat as I read the words, "Tyler, I've thought about writing this email 100 times, but I always stopped myself. I didn't know if it would help you or if it would only make things harder. But as I sit here tonight, I realize there are things I need to say, even if they're too late. You were never just a student to me. From the moment I met you, you challenged me in ways I didn't expect, made me feel things I hadn't felt in years. What we shared wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated and, yes, wrong by every standard. But it was real, and I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life. I don't know where you are right now, or if you even want to hear from me, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Proud of the person you are, the strength you've shown, and the future I know you'll have. I'm starting over, Tyler, somewhere far from here. It's not easy, but it's necessary. I hope you can find the same strength to start over, to build a life that's truly yours. Take care of yourself, be happy, and never forget that you mattered to me. Always. Marcus." Tears streamed down my face as I read his words, my heart breaking all over again. He was gone, but his voice had reached me one last time, offering a bittersweet mix of closure and longing. I wanted to reply, to tell him that he mattered to me too, that he always would. But I knew I couldn't. This was his goodbye, and I had to honor it. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. Grief, acceptance, and eventually a glimmer of hope. Marcus's email was a reminder that life moved on, even when it felt impossible. Slowly, I began to rebuild piece by piece. I moved to a new city, started a new job, and began to find myself again. But Marcus was never far from my thoughts. His words stayed with me, a quiet encouragement that pushed me forward even in my darkest moments. I knew I would never forget him, and a part of me hoped that wherever he was finding peace too. One evening, as I unpacked boxes in my new apartment, I found the note he had written me. "You're worth the risk." I smiled through the tears that welled up in my eyes, placing it carefully in a frame. It was a reminder not just of what we had shared, but of the lessons I had learned: to take risks, to love deeply, and to let go when the time came. Life didn't magically become perfect. There were still moments when I missed him so intensely it hurt, when I wondered what could have been if things had turned out differently. But I carried his love with me, a quiet strength that would guide me through whatever came next. And though our story had ended, it would always be a part of me, a testament to the risks we take for love and the resilience it takes to move forward when it all falls apart. Hey, what did you think of the story? If you enjoyed it, let us know in the comments what score you'd give it from 1 to 10. This story is based on a real-life account sent to us by one of our followers. Your story could also be featured here on our channel. Share your story in the comments or send it directly to us. We'll turn it into a powerful and emotional video just like this one. We can't wait to hear your story and bring it to life here on the channel.